32-year-old Chad Doerman resided in New Richmond, Ohio. It is a small city nestled within Clermont County, where crime rates are relatively low. With his wife Laura, stepdaughter Alexis, and their 3 sons, 7-year-old Clayton, 4-year-old Hunter, and 3-year-old Chase, they shared a modest yet charming home in the community. However, when responding to a distress call on Laurel-Lindale Road, officers are about to discover a gruesome sight in the Doerman family home.
Show us your fucking hands now!
Stand up!
Stand up! Stand up!
Stand up now! Stand up!
Stand the fuck up!
EMS to stage and air clear. You're gonna go ahead and fly whenever any unit's gonna arrive.
Get your hands out of here.
72. Tell them we're 21.
On the 15th of June 2023, New Richmond and the Doerman family experienced a seismic shift. Chad had fatally shot his 3 sons and injured his wife, Laura, in an apparent effort to prevent her from intervening. As more details from the case emerged, the more horrific it became. On that fateful afternoon, tragedy unfolded within the community and the Doerman household. Laura's frantic 911 call, reporting her son's shooting, coincided with Alexis racing to the firehouse down the street, screaming about her father's violent act. In no time, patrol cars flooded the area, with dispatch instructing ambulances to approach discreetly to catch the shooter off guard. As officers arrived at the scene, they encountered an unimaginable horror.
63, we're 21. Get the EMS over here.
Well, I get drugs real quick, but I don't do drugs now. I'm sober. I'm not trying to fight you.
63.
Get your butt inside.
3 young boys were shot, their bodies covered with black squares. Their father Chad was seated on the porch with his rifle, displaying a high level of callous indifference. Despite rescue efforts, the boys succumbed to their injuries. You could also hear the heart-wrenching cries of the boy's mother in the background. The most unsettling aspect of the body cam footage was Chad's remarkable calmness. At some point, he mentions that he is sober, as though it were a pertinent detail amidst the tragedy of 3 murdered children in the front yard. In the meantime, Laura was swiftly transported to the University of Cincinnati Hospital after sustaining a gunshot wound to her hand, all along having hoped that her boys would somehow survive. Sadly, even news reporters became aware of the boys' deaths before Laura did. Tanya, from WCPO, even publicly acknowledged this on the news that night. However, detectives had instructed her team not to release the information until Laura was notified. Chad's attorney initially requested a $75,000 bond, but the prosecution provided additional details of the case in such a manner that prompted their request for an unprecedentedly high bond. In presenting the case, the prosecution emphasized the profound trauma inflicted on the family, community, and first responders.
At this point are as follows. The trauma that this man has inflicted on his family, the community, law enforcement, first responders, and all of the rest of us who have any idea what's going on here is unspeakable. There's been a full admission in this case, Judge. The case is still new. We're still discovering facts. But the evil horror of what we know is impossible to process. In an act of just incomprehensible cruelty, the father that stands before you lined up his 3 young boys, and he executed them in his own home with a rifle. They were ages 3, 4, and 7, Judge.
It's unfathomable how law enforcement managed to maintain composure while confronting such a harrowing scene. These men are most likely fathers or uncles themselves, so we imagine it took a lot of restraint to wrestle Chad so calmly. Still, having to perform CPR on those little boys has to be one of the hardest things to do. You could argue that they have had training and all of that, but nothing truly prepares you for being in a situation like that. According to the prosecution, Chad orchestrated the execution of his 3 young sons with chilling premeditation. What everyone had believed was a mental breakdown was now upset by the fact that further investigation proved he had been planning this execution-style murder for months. The prosecution also revealed that in a desperate attempt to shield her children, Laura had seized the gun wielded by Chad. The prosecutor also explained that one of the boys managed to get away, only to be hunted down and brought back to the property to be killed in full view of witnesses.
Desperation to save her children, the mother at some point grabbed the gun that father was wielding to attempt to protect him. We know that one of the boys was able to flee into a field near the home. And again, we know from his admission, father hunted that boy down, drug him back to the property, and executed him in front of witnesses. The mother was shot through the hand in her attempt to protect her children.
The prosecutor reminded the judge that Chad had confessed to the most heinous crime the prosecutor hoped to encounter in his career. There is also a strong belief that the likelihood of flight is high. Add that to the danger Chad poses to the community, and the prosecution had grounds enough to request a bond of $20 million.
The danger he poses to the community is a factor that this court can consider, and I think with the facts in front of you, Judge, we can't name a person that poses a greater threat to the community. As his prior record goes, Judge, it is fairly minimal. He was charged with domestic violence in 2010. He is not, to my knowledge, on probation community control. Judge, the facts of this case are hopefully like no other we will ever see. When this case gets indicted in the Court of Common Pleas, I am certain that a no bond hearing will be held, and I would hope that would be granted. But at this point, at this juncture, we're going to ask this court to issue a bond we've never asked for before. I'm going to ask for a bond of $20 million. I hope I never need to request such a bond again.
Prosecutor Mark Takulve, who has been working in Clermont County for 34 years, made a significant statement afterward. In his own words, "This is the most horrifying and sickening case I have ever seen."
This is by far the most sickening, horrifying crime I have seen.
A quick look at Chad's prior criminal record reveals numerous motor vehicle offenses. But most notable of all is an incident in 2010. Chad had been arrested for allegedly choking his father, Keith Doerman. The case was, however, dismissed when Keith failed to appear in court as the prosecution's witness. By Saturday, June 17th, Keith conducted an interview where he clarified that the 2010 charge was a misunderstanding and was subsequently dropped as such. He may have been trying to paint his son in a more favorable light, but there's absolutely no way that can happen. Everyone saw Chad for the horrible person he was. What he did was brutal and inexcusable. Keith also described Chad as a loving father and is convinced that Chad must have snapped in the moment. In light of the general picture that Keith was trying to paint about Chad, one neighbor had a different perspective. He explained that Chad was very unstable, mean, and always very angry. To be specific, Chad is said to have yelled at his wife every single day. He would belittle her and downgrade the kids as well.
Every day yelling at his wife, dogging her, downgrading the kids, just very angry. And if they didn't do what he said, and I've seen it firsthand, but I never thought that he would do that.
Another neighbor commented about him, this time alluding to his daily drinking, yelling, and one time threatening to kill her dog if it got loose. She also mentioned that she had called the police on him once. Now, if that's true, it would possibly make sense as to why he told the police he wasn't drunk when they arrived at the Doerman home. Thankfully, the prosecution is more than willing to fight Keith's idea of Chad, as they will be chasing the maximum penalty for him. While they could confirm that it was a premeditated act, they were still short on determining a motive for the brutal attacks. But of course, there are speculations. The more prominent one is the marital issues between Laura and Chad. The couple is said to have had a possible divorce brewing. This has not been confirmed, but it could explain the crime itself. The sheer brutality of committing such an act in front of one's spouse seems extremely vindictive. If there were indeed relationship problems, it's plausible that Chad sought a very twisted kind of revenge on Laura. Sadly, Alexis was left traumatized, and 3 little angels lost their lives. Despite the heartbreak, the community has been rallying around Laura and Alexis. A memorial has been set up outside her home, with many items left in remembrance of the 3 sweet boys who tragically lost their lives. At the nearby baseball field, a memorial was set up, and players held a moment of silence and prayer for the family. Chad Doerman faced 3 counts of aggravated murder initially, But by his next court appearance on the 22nd of June, a grand jury indicted Chad on a total of 21 charges. This included 9 counts of aggravated murder, 8 counts of kidnapping, and 4 counts of felonious assault. The murder charges stem from the deaths of the 3 boys, while the kidnapping charges relate to holding everyone else against their will. Notably, some of the details of the crime had changed. We now learned that the 4-year-old was the first victim, and he was shot twice in the house. The 7-year-old had tried to get away, but while prosecutors had earlier stated that he was brought back and shot execution style, evidence would later suggest that he was shot from behind. Even after that, the defendant approached the injured child and shot him twice in the head at close range again. Next, he targeted the 3-year-old, attacking the mother and ultimately shooting the child at close range. Learning that Chad forcibly removed the 3-year-old from his mother's arms adds another layer of horror to this tragic event. Fighting her hardest to save her children, but it wasn't enough. We can't imagine how helpless she must have felt in the moment and the lasting guilt afterward. According to court documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, one officer reported hearing discussions about someone shooting at the firehouse multiple times in the audio recordings. While this hasn't been confirmed, it has been established that Chad's stepdaughter Alexis was running to the firehouse. Could Chad have been attempting to shoot at her as well? This is a valid question because it appears 7-year-old Clayton was shot at the end of the driveway while trying to flee. This raises the question of whether he was attempting to reach the firehouse with his sister, but couldn't make it in time. Notably, this is all just speculation based on available court documents. Chad is currently facing the maximum sentence for his crimes. And like most death penalty cases, there is an added level of complexity and secrecy. Mark Takulve, speaking after court, reiterated that he couldn't provide many details due to the severity of the charges.
I can't go into a whole lot of facts, all right, because this is a death penalty case, and my goal is to have this man executed for slaughtering these 3 little boys. It is an incomprehensible.
It does bring comfort to know that Alexis found solace in sports. Her coach and teammates have been providing crucial support during this challenging period. Chad Doerman is scheduled to stand trial on July 8, 2024.